Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
Hi, my name is Marian Tupey. I'm a senior fellow at the Cato Institute and co-author of Superabundance, the story of population growth, innovation, and human flourishing on an infinitely bountiful planet. Speaking on Dr. Sky Experience, Talk Radio 77, WABC.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the show that you tell us you enjoy so much, the Dr. Sky Experience. Here on America's iconic radio station, Talk Radio 77, WABC, from New York City and around the world. Simply the crown jewel of talk radio. Today, as always, a very special guest on the Dr. Sky Experience. Just a moment, we'll be introducing you to Marian L. Tupey. He's a senior fellow at the Cato Institute Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity. He's the co-author of 10 Global Trends Every Smart Person Should Know, and many others you will find interesting. Co-author of the Simon Abundance Index and editor of the website humanprogress.org. Our purpose today with Mr. Tupey is to talk about a co-authored book that he has out there that every person within the sound of this voice should probably take a look at, most definitely, entitled Superabundance. And it's a privilege and honor here on the Dr. Sky Experience to welcome our very special guest, Mr. Marian L. Tupey. Sir, welcome to the Dr. Sky Experience. How are you today?
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be on your show.
Well, it's an honor to have you, sir, because what we're going to share here is something I think very interesting. I've been reading, as many other people. My background is astronomy, space, and astrophysics, and I've always been talking here about American exceptionalism on so many other interviews that we do here. Peace and prosperity is the thing that we like to talk about. But before we begin, Mr. Tupey, please tell us a little bit more about the mission and goals of the Cato Institute. We've had guests before from Cato, but in your words, describe the Cato Institute to our listeners.
Well, Cato Institute is a libertarian think tank. We started in 1977 in San Francisco and then moved in the early 90s to Washington, D.C., where we've been ever since. We are committed to individual freedom, to free markets, and to limited government and peace.
Absolutely. What could be better than that in these rather troubling times, as we hear all around the globe? But we bring you on the radio today, to share with us the story of superabundance. I'll take the liberty of describing a little brief background of this particular book, the story of population growth, innovation, and human flourishing on an infinitely bountiful planet. But before we get started, sir, we read in the mainstream media, in legacy media, that the Earth's population has at least, if I'm correct, and you'll correct us, I'm sure, has reached the 8 billion human souls here on this particular planet. And sometimes we hear all these cautionary tales that, well, in some people's minds, that's way too many humans and too many souls to satisfy all the needs on a small little planet known as the Earth. As Carl Sagan described it, as you probably know, the pale blue dot. But give us a little bit of excerpt from this particular book that you co-authored with Gail Pooley, Superabundance.
Well, people who complain about there being too many people in the world usually mean some other people, not they, their families, or their friends. You know, as far as they are concerned, they should go on living on this planet. Other people who should diminish in number. This idea that the world has too many people has been around for a very long time and has led to some horrible policies around the world, such as forced sterilizations in India. Then, of course, the famous one-child policy in China, which has prevented the birth of about 400 million people, and other human rights abuses around the world. But in our book, we use mathematics and facts to show that actually human beings are good for the planet. Basically, what we find is every 1% increase in population decreases the prices of natural resources by about 1%. And when you think about it just for a second, you know, it's unavoidable to acknowledge that it's true. At the time of Thomas Jefferson, there was only 1 billion people in the world. Today, there's 8 billion people, and yet nobody would want to live in 1800 when life expectancy was about 30 years, when most of the people around the world were in absolute poverty, going hungry, many without shelter and adequate clothing. So on many different dimensions of human well-being, child mortality, literacy, maternal mortality, education, the world is a much better place. And the argument that we are making in the book is that humans are to be credited for making the world a better place.
Well, I don't take exception to what you're saying, sir, and I'm here to be a good listener, because I think the art of any talk show host, and hopefully as we continue this particular interview, you would at least give me at least the rite of passage to say that I was a good listener better than a talker, because, as we would say, in many areas of the world today, unfortunately, that conversation is really not there. So many people either talk over each other or they think that their side of the equation is the righteous side. But I do want you to explain something here, because in my education, I remember back in college having a basic economics class. We all studied the Malthusian theory of economics. And obviously, I know you probably know this better than anybody, but from my limited knowledge in the economic world, we always knew that there was this disparity between population growth and economic growth, meaning, and that of population was always that what? In greater excess than what the food supply would be. So would you just tell the audience and explain a little bit more about that Malthusian theory of economics and how, if does at all collide with what you're talking about here? And give us some information to show that that's basically not as dangerous a thing as what Thomas Malthus proposed a long time ago.
That's correct. Thank you. Yes, Thomas Malthus wrote a famous essay on the principle of population in 1798, in which he argued that population grew exponentially. That's 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. Right. Whereas food production grew at a linear rate, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the difference between these two growth rates, linear and exponential, would ultimately lead to tremendous amount of suffering and famine and starvation. And the perfect example of that was later on a book in 1968, The Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich, who claimed that no matter what we did as humans to adjust our behavior, hundreds of millions of people were going to die in the 1980s and 1970s as a result of lack of food. And his specific focus was on India, which experienced a massive population explosion in the 1960s and the 1970s. And India would have been a perfect candidate for a place where everything was going to end up in tears. Today, India is the most populous country in the world. It just taken over China with 1.5 billion people, and it is a food exporter, not a food importer. So what has happened? Yeah. How come that India is now a food exporter rather than starving in the streets with millions of people dead? Well, human innovation. That's what happened. Is that you have all of these people, and they've been given a modicum of freedom. India is a much freer country than China. India is also a democracy. And once their economics were liberalized, all of these smart people started to turn their attention and their efforts into making their lives and those of their families better. And so they implemented new things. They implemented new types of wheat and corn and barley and different crops, and they improved the efficiency of their farming and transport. And before you knew it, India's income per capita has increased something like sixfold in the last 30 or 40 years. And as I said, it is now a exporter of food. And this has happened all over the world, which is why famines have basically disappeared from the world outside of war zones.
It's very interesting. And I want to remind our listeners, you're listening to the Dr. Sky Experience on America's iconic radio station. That is Talk Radio 77 WABC, the crown jewel of talk radio. And who here is our special guest? Marian Tupey. He's a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, and he's co-author of a great book, ladies and gentlemen, that will open up the minds, especially at this time of the year, as we conduct this interview toward the latter portion of December 2022. We need hope in this particular world when we hear so many negative things in the world, in the mainstream news, and, of course, in legacy media. His book, co-authored with Gail Pooley, a book entitled Superabundance, and you can learn so much more about that at superabundance.com. You know, Marian, this is quite interesting. You talk in the book about something called time prices. give us a little illustration of this, because I like your answer about the other side of the Malthusian theory, and you've just educated me. I did not know that India now exceeds population of China and is actually a food exporter. And I'll get into a little discussion with you later in the conversation about the woes of what communist China is doing, repressing individual freedoms. But please continue on time prices.
So, question is, how do you measure an improvement in standards of living? How do you compare, say, the United States in 2020 with the United States in 1850? How do you compare the United States to China and
right.
or India and over across long periods of time? And the problem is that you either have to adjust for exchange rate and purchasing power parity, or you have to adjust for inflation. Many of these things are contentious. A lot of Americans, for example, have a problem with the way that the federal government calculates inflation. Is it too low? Is it too high? We simply don't know. There's a lot of debate about it, including in the government itself. And so we translate everything into time prices. We don't use dollars and cents. What we use is minutes and hours of work. We ask ourselves, how many minutes do Americans have to work in order to buy a pound of beef today, as opposed to a pound of beef in 1850. We ask ourselves, how many minutes do Americans have to buy to work to buy a pound of bread, as opposed to people in China? And the beauty about time prices is that time, an hour of work, is the same anywhere and across time. So those are time prices. Time prices just tell you how long you have to work in order to be able to afford to buy something. And it's easy to calculate. You just take a price of a good in a store and you divide it by your hourly income. And so when we did that for unskilled workers and manufacturing workers in the United States, we got some extraordinary results. For example, for the same amount of work that an American would have to work to earn enough money to buy a pound of rice in 1850, he could get 111 pounds in 2020.
Yes.
The same amount of work that would buy him 1 pound of beef in 1850 now buys him 8 pounds of beef. And so we can measure standard of living that way.
So we're discounting the concept of global inflation, though, or are we not? I mean, because obviously people here in America and around the world, I mean, not just American people have a concern, but are you then discounting the concept of inflation, or you're talking in just general terms? Because I'm sure many people are just scratching their heads saying, no, my index of inflation now is much higher. According to many in America, please correct me if I'm not correct on this, inflation is at an all-time high since what, the 1970s? And many people may say your concept is good, but how does inflation affect this? And is that factored into what you're talking about? And if not, tell us why.
We actually can transcend inflation. We don't have to deal with inflation at all. We can take it out of our equation. How do we do that? Is because we are dealing just with nominal prices and nominal wages. So it doesn't matter what the inflation rate is. If a pound of bread now costs you 2 minutes of work, and a pound of bread costs you 3 minutes of work 20 years ago, then you are 1/3 better off. When you divide nominal price in a store, that's what nominal price is basically the price at the moment. If you walk to a store and you see a price, that's nominal price. And you divide that price by your hourly income today, right? Yes. And then you repeat the process 20 years from now or 50 years ago. Since you are comparing nominal prices with nominal wages, then it doesn't matter if the inflation is 100% or 1,000% or 2%, because inflation will translate into both prices and wages. So typically, across time, what happens is that wages increase at a faster pace than prices. That's been the case in the United States for the last 40 years.
Sure.
We had an inflation of about 2%, and people were getting increases in salary of about 3%, right?
Yep.
Now, I do acknowledge, of course, that in the last 18 months or so, we are seeing an adverse process of that. We are seeing prices rising at a faster pace than inflation. But that's not the case for the long-term trends that we are looking at, and hopefully it will also stabilize in the United States as well.
Llévate más de lo que esperas todos los días con el nuevo McValue en McDonald's. Ahora puedes comprar uno y sumarle otro por $1. Así que cuando tu equipo favorito enfrente a sus rivales, enfrenta tus antojos con $5 Meal Deals. Y si estás corriendo para alcanzar el desayuno, corre a la para llevarte ofertas antes del cutoff. Tú decides, y con McValue, tu decisión siempre rinde más. Precios y participación pueden variar. BOGO $1 válido para un producto de igual o menor valor. Debe estar registrado en Rewards para ofertas en el app.
Well, then war is the great destabilizer then in any of these equations, because as any economist, I mean, you can put this all on paper and in theory. And again, I'm very happy to have you here because I like positivity, and I certainly love what the Cato Institute stands for. As I mentioned before at the top of the interview, we've had many other scholars from the Cato Institute talking about the different expertise areas that they, of course, study. But what I'm concerned is, obviously, maybe it's an understatement to you and the listeners, the factor of war, the unpredictability of war, it changes the whole dynamic, obviously, right?
That's correct. Also, stupid government policy. So
Yes.
what we are arguing in the book is something very discreet, very focused. What we are saying is that there is no reason, there is no natural limit on the planet of how many people can flourish, improve their well-being, because, you know, we are human beings. We have ideas which we can then translate into inventions and innovations, such as more plentiful yields of rice or wheat, or better breeding techniques for beef and so forth. So on our planet, within normal parameters, which is to say liberty and peace, we can all flourish. But there is nothing about our argument to predict that things like that can continue into the future. As you said, war is the great destroyer, and also bad government policies. The fact that prices of fuel are elevated in the United States and they are stratospheric in Europe, that has nothing to do with the amount of oil, gas, and coal on the planet.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%, Marian, because let's put it this way. So many people on one side of the equation are saying here in America, I'm just speaking about the United States, and maybe in other countries like Europe and other areas around the globe, other countries, drill, drill, drill because of the necessity. And I hear what you're saying. The resources are still in the earth. The earth is not, lacking these resources. You're saying, man, maybe you don't agree with it, but the ability to have bad governance and bad policy from government prevents us from getting what you're talking about in this book as superabundance. So again, going back to the main tenet here, we should know, and we're learning from you on this particular interview, the concept here, one of the main themes here in superabundance is don't despair and don't panic when you hear more people around the earth thinking that you just have more mouths to feed and the world is spinning out of control. You're staying here in a very well outlined and educated plan that, and if I'm hearing you correctly, history shows us that scarcity is no match for what? Human ingenuity. Is that pretty much a summation?
That's exactly right, yes. And Malthus was a good historian. In other words, he was reflecting on the world prior to 1800, when people really were dying due to starvation. But in the last 200 years, through the spread of human freedom and human dignity and equality before the law, we have broken with that Malthusian prism. We now live in a society, at least for the time being, when if you have a good idea, you can share it with other people, you can improve on it, you can publish it, you can patent it, you can invest in the stock market and make tons of money by making lives of other people better. But there's nothing guaranteed about it. I mean, in China right now, they have made this crazy man who is in charge of China has decided that basically control over the country is much more important than economic growth. And economic growth in China has basically dived.
Well, that's exactly right, Marian. And I want to jump on this bandwagon here, and I want your opinion, of course, as our guest. When you deny people the human right, their individual liberty, I know I heard the word come out of your mouth many times, and we're a big proponent here on this particular show of not only American exceptionalism, but let's go around the globe. We're talking about individual liberty and freedom. And let me ask you this, because I think we can get also a great education in a sidebar here. Describe the definition in what the Cato Institute would talk about as the word libertarian. Describe that as far as what it talks about in the concept of liberty and freedom, because then I want to get onto the whole China thing and talk about the woes of all these repressive countries around the world that want to deny people the human right. But describe libertarianism from the Cato Institute side so people may not be aware of what it really means.
Well, libertarianism or classical liberalism is basically about maximization of human freedom that is compatible with rule of law and basic level of order. I mean, basically, you should be able to do whatever you want without negatively impacting other people.
Sure.
So it doesn't really matter if
like live and let live concept in basic terms.
Live and let live, yeah. Be it in your economic behavior or in your personal behavior. I'm not going to tell you how to live a good life. Go ahead and make the best of it. If you make the right decisions, then you're going to flourish. If you're going to make the bad decisions, then there are going to be negative consequences for you. But let individual human beings decide as to how they want to live. And the truth is that on average, human beings are rational in a sense that they want to have a better life. And the way you create a better life for yourself within the capitalist system is by creating value for other people. So, whether you're discovering a Post-it note or a microchip or an iPhone or a better system of combustion or a better car that runs on electricity, it's up to you. Make your money in that way, and let's see who buys your product. The problem with the government is that very often they put their finger on the scale. They decide who should win in the market and who should lose. They're obsessing about wind and solar, which have a potential, but they are far from the kind of technologies that could power the world. But at the same time, they have basically criminalized nuclear energy.
I agree.
It's a problem.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. And we just go off on a sidebar here. You're obviously watching this very closely, I'm sure. And the Cato Institute, progress the U.S. Department of Energy has had last week in making small strides in fusion technology. And can you imagine, Marian, imagine this. I mean, I'm a person of science that studies, of course, the things like the solar, the way the sun produces energy from fusion. But isn't it just amazing and breathtaking to think about a potential power source like that of the stars that we could harness, which doesn't have any deleterious, output and emissions. But then again, it seems like it's a long way off, but I'm sure the Cato Institute supports all that type of clean energy beyond what we talk about wind and solar, right?
Yes, but although I would say that, in sort of our viewpoint, let the market decide. I mean, in the short to medium term, it's unavoidable that we are going to be using fossil fuels. The Europeans are discovering this. They've been gerrymandering their energy grid for 20, 30 years, and they are now facing an absolute apocalypse. What is happening in Europe is unimaginable to Americans. If this happened in the United States, we'd be in the streets with forks and whatever else to go after our political leaders. And the Europeans are suffering greatly because they've decided they are going to get away from fossil fuels in short order. Now, obviously, we have a technology which has been time-tried, which is extremely, and that's nuclear fission. Unfortunately, we have criminalized it essentially in the United States. We haven't built we are shutting down more nuclear reactors than we are producing. And in the long run, I agree with you. I think that fusion would be absolutely fantastic. But, as you said, it's going to take decades to get there. And in the meantime, we could be building more fission reactors.
Well, I'm really privileged and honored to have you here. And I just want to remind the listeners here, you're listening, of course, to the Dr. Sky Experience. Privileged and honored to have these great guests here to share with everybody here on America's iconic radio station here on Talk Radio 77 WABC, as we call it, the crown jewel of talk radio, and rightfully so, out of New York City and around the world at WABCRadio.com. Our special guest, as you've been hearing throughout this exclusive interview, Marian Tupey. He's a senior fellow with the Cato Institute. He's the co-author with Cato Cooley of a book that I think really will open up our minds. It's entitled Superabundance. Learn more at superabundance.com. And I have a few other quick questions here before time runs out, and you know how that works in the broadcast world. The clock rules. I just wanted to talk with you about the real problem that I see here. It makes me grind my teeth when I talk about the lack of freedoms in communist China. The people, I know so many, Chinese folks out there, Chinese Americans and people from China and all other countries that do not have the same freedoms. It's so sad because the people sometimes get a very bad name. Not all of them are believers of communist Chinese philosophy, but that is really, just slowing down all the good that can come from all this. And I wonder, what helpful hints could you give us about how people can break free from this? Because it seems like they have cameras on every street corner. And President Xi wants to what? Control everything, every aspect from the internet and everything. How do these people eventually look at freedom and liberty, as we're talking about here today, to consider what you're talking about superabundance and liberty reigns free?
Well, look, I'm not a specialist in this area, but it's obvious that the Chinese people, at least a substantial fraction of them, are keen on having more freedom. I mean, part of the reason why China is spending billions upon billions of dollars for this massive surveillance system is precisely because they cannot trust their people not to want greater freedom and not to want more representative government. I think what's happening in China right now is that Xi and people around him realize, although it seems that he is the driving force behind it, they have realized that when you do have a free-ish economy, when you do have massive economic growth, as China has had, you're going to have an emergence of alternative sources of power within society, be it billionaires or industry groups and things like that. And when you have an emergence of alternative sources of power in the state, which is what made the United States and Europe great, obviously, you are also going to have a decline in the power of the central government. And so he had to basically make a choice. Either I'm going to keep the Communist Party in charge of my country, and I'm going to squash the economy, or I'm going to allow the economy to continue to grow, but then I'm going to lose control of my country. And he decided that control was more important than economic growth. And I should think that in the long run, the Chinese people are not going to put up with this, because if there is one source of legitimacy for the Communist Party, is that it is able to generate high rates of economic growth. But now it won't have that source of legitimacy. Nobody has voted for it, and now they cannot even deliver basic standards of living. So they're going to be looking at very tough times. And, from literature, we know that only like 2% of people take to the streets and threaten the government with overthrow. Those kinds of political movements tend to be successful. If only 2% of Chinese go into the streets of Shanghai or Beijing, the Communist Party could fold.
Absolutely. We love freedom and liberty on this particular program, and we talk here locally about American exceptionalism. And we also have great guests like yourself here. And I wanted to end off with a couple of quick questions here. I know this would take a lot of time, and we'll hope to have you back to expound on this even further. But you're responsible for a lot of this about the Simon Abundance Index, a new way to measure availability of resources. Tell us briefly what that means to get back to and on topic here with superabundance.
Well, it's just a concentrated form of what we looked at in the book, looking at the time prices of resources. How long does it take you to earn enough money to buy something? And Simon Abundance Index goes back to 1980, and what we do is to basically look at 50 most important commodities in the world, foodstuffs, fuel, minerals, metals, and we sort of estimate how much cheaper they are getting. And indeed, whilst the population of the world has sort of doubled during the last 40 years, they've all become much cheaper. So that's the basic takeaway from Simon Abundance Index.
Well, Marian, you're a great guest here, and I really appreciate your time, and also all the other individuals that represent the Cato Institute. As I've mentioned many times, and I'll say it proudly again, we've had many of the scholars like yourself on this particular program talking about liberty and talking about the many things that the Cato Institute stands for. If I'm correct, they can get more information about this particular book at what? Again, I'm saying superabundance.com. Is that the correct location for this?
That is correct, superabundance.com, and obviously the book is available either from the Cato store online or from Amazon and Walmart and Barnes & Nobles and anywhere else.
And how about a little tease to the Cato Institute website? Well, what would that be for the listeners?
Cato.org.
Well, thank you so much. Marian Tupey, great guest, senior fellow at the Cato Institute, talking about a book he's co-authored with Gail Pooley, as I've mentioned, superabundance.com. That concludes this exciting interview. I certainly appreciate your time, sir. Stay on the line as we continue to move toward the hard break. And again, once again, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Dr. Sky Experience exclusively here on America's iconic radio station, Talk Radio 77, WABC, out of New York City and around the world. They say, we like to say it, and we believe every bit of it, the crown jewel of talk radio. Learn more about the Dr. Sky Experience and all other things that we're doing, both the blog and the podcast, simply www.wabcradio.com. Thank you so much, Marian Tupey, for your time, and a Happy New Year to you and your family.
Thank you very much, and to you too.
Today's episode is sponsored by NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast. Making financial decisions shouldn't feel like picking a TV show. Too many options, too much hype, and no way to know what's actually good. NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast cuts through the clutter. Their finance journalists break through real-world money decisions with clear research-backed insights. From investing to home buying to credit cards, the nerds help you navigate major financial decisions with confidence. Leave TV to fate. Leave your next financial move to the nerds. Follow NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast wherever you listen.